the technology we're using is through Phytech, and they have the dendrometers that measure fruit growth, measure tree growth, measure soil moisture, and then also monitors pressures throughout your irrigation system. And it has been a great tool to be able to see putting a number on what's going on out there. I think we all have a gut feeling of what's happening, but being able to put numbers to things is helpful.
We're also using Phytech for irrigation monitoring, all the same things that Chet just brought up, seeing how the fruit's reacting to irrigation, how the plant's reacting, and what the soil moisture looks like is pretty key for us. And then being able to kind of see how the irrigations are actually being done is a big key factor for me in Phytech, because they have pressure sensors in your irrigation lines, so you know for sure for how long was that system run on any given day and when it was run. So we use that for monitoring, and then we also use Nelson Twig for system control. And so that way you have boxes basically that get a radio signal and open or close a valve or start and stop a pump, and that way you can run your irrigation system remotely. And that's where workers get a little concerned, because they think this technology is going to replace me. You know, if my boss can just do this on his computer, then he doesn't need me anymore, right? And so I think that's a big part of hesitancy sometimes for the workers trying to adopt this technology. They don't want to contribute to something that's going to put them out of a job. And so it's explaining to them, it's not about replacing you, it's just about changing the style of work that you're doing, you know. Instead of opening valves and starting pumps, you're out there checking for plugged sprinklers or plugged emitters, making sure the pressure's running right, and that we're getting a quality irrigation job done. So, and they're still planning the irrigation out themselves. They're just not physically opening and closing the valves.
It's all about creating higher efficiencies. You know, it's the overtime rule is just looming over all of our heads. And if we can reduce some of those hours, overtime hours, that's going to be helpful. But also being more productive with the hours our employees have. Instead of having to run around switching valves, they can, just what Paul was saying, check for leaks, check for plugs, check for breaks, then it's better time spent.
And you get an extra level of precision with your irrigation. You know, if you want to run it 5 hours, it's going to run 5 hours flat. It's not going to run 5 hours, 20 minutes, and 30 seconds. It's just going to run 5 hours, you know. So I like that aspect of it as well.
And that's a good point, Paul, because we found when we first started implementing Phytech, it was calling, let's say, for a 12-hour drip set. Well, according to Phytech, that would have been a 10-hour drip set, because he turned off an hour earlier and started an hour later. You know, so we used to think I'm getting my 12 hours. In reality, it was 10 or less, or maybe it was 14. You know, and so it's really helped dial in those exact sets that we're calling for. Older systems, having older systems that can be made to operate autonomously or whatever, or adding the auto valves and that stuff. If you don't have a VFD pump on your place, it makes it a lot harder to go the automatic route as far as valves go and all that stuff. So that's been a big drawback.
Yeah, it's not impossible if you don't have a VFD, but it's a lot more of a challenge for sure, and you need to build systems to accommodate it. Like you need pressure or like dump valves that are, so if you're turning on a pump to fill a main line, you may need to dump water off of a side valve for 10-15 minutes to reduce how much water is going into that main line at first, and then have that valve shut off once it's full and you're at operating pressure. But you need to build, it's not just something that's ready plug and play. You need to build that, you know, and and it's also just the confidence that this box won't blow up a main line for me, you know. I think for the owners of the company I work for, that's the biggest hesitancy that they have, is that we're going to break stuff with this technology. What happens if we have a pump running and all the valves are off? Because broken main lines are expensive, and not just to fix, but like they have down the line problems. If you get a bunch of rocks in your line, that can be a multi-year problem. And I had a main line that just got packed full of gravel, and then that went into all the sub-mains. That even made its way into the laterals. And so,
all season long.
Yeah. Well, next few years, we were finding some of it would come loose and shoot into a lateral, and then half the row would just stop working.
Oh, man.
So then they would have to cut out a piece of the lateral, shake out the gravel.
This one should be good for a while. Yeah.
So
that's rough.
Yeah, the consequences for breaking stuff can be pretty high.
Even as far down as that guy who's turning on your valves, what I would call your regular irrigator, knowing what all those sensors do. That fruit on a sensor and what it's measuring and how he's irrigating affects that is huge. It brings them into the solution and not just someone sitting on the outside. Right. And so I think they have to be a part of the conversation. Just they see new sensors and all this stuff out there, they might think it's this new high-tech crazy stuff, but it's kind of simple in a way. No, it's just measuring this on a tree. Come see how it works, and right. That has helped bringing them along, buying in essentially to it.
Right, it's not just the how do you do it, it's why we're doing it. And, I think that's critical. Kind of along the same lines, I would say the problem I've had is when something isn't working in the field, getting over like a fear barrier with that worker to try to troubleshoot it themselves instead of just kind of shutting down, being like, oh, it's not working, I better call up the chain and get help. It's teaching them how to troubleshoot that sort of thing for themselves, because it's just like anything else that they've dealt with in the field. But if you don't teach them ahead of time, this is how this works in a kind of deeper way, they're not going to be able to troubleshoot it for themselves either. So you don't want to just hand someone a phone and say, just press this button and this will open, but then not go show them how the solenoid works on the valve, right? Because if they know how the solenoid works, then they can test to see if the solenoid's working, if the valve's not opening or something, just for an example, right? So you want to give them a whole deep look into like how does this whole system work, not just a superficial do this for me and that's it. I do think there's value, though, also in just knowing how things work for yourself. It gives you more trust in it.
One good piece of advice, be proactive when you see a sensor down. Call immediately. With, let's say, that block isn't reporting how it should be reporting. Well, that's just a phone call or a quick email, and they're usually pretty good about coming out. But if you're waiting for them to notice that sensor's not working, you're going to be waiting a while, I think.
You could be waiting a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's
be proactive when you do see sensors down. Call up your provider and let them know. For me, what I'm trying to get out of my irrigation technology, that return on investment, it's reducing overtime hours for my irrigators, have their time be spent more on more productive time, as in getting fixing plug sprinklers or broken pipe, any of that kind of stuff, not switching valves, especially when it's cooling time, because they'll just spend 5 hours in the afternoon just running around on the four-wheeler switching valves. And that, I think, is hopefully where it'll start paying for itself.
In addition, I'm looking for maybe just improvements in how I'm irrigating in terms of fruit quality, growing more target fruit. And I think the first step into that process is going to be getting precision in what I'm doing now, precision and consistency, because if I want to adapt my practices, I need to start from a baseline of consistency and precision. And if I'm just kind of randomly irrigating, making a change doesn't necessarily affect anything, right? So if I know what I'm doing, and I'm doing it consistently, then I can move one direction or the other and see how that affects my crop. And that's how I'm going to dial in my precision irrigation, I think, over time. But it's not going to be just a one-season endeavor to figure that out. So,
and that's what's kind of cool about these systems or these new technologies, as you use them for multiple years, you can look at season-to-season comparisons and how you watered during those 3 hottest months of July.
That's right.
And you're comparing the last 4 Julys, and kind of seeing what your end product was, right? Because it's still all about getting apples into a box and having that right size. And it's definitely made me change my irrigation practices from before having the technology out there till now. The old way was, let's say, a 12-hour drip set, no matter what, just because that's what it called for on the ET, to where now it's maybe pulsing that every day and seeing how when I water late in the afternoon affects fruit size as opposed to watering at noon when it's getting to be the hottest part of the day. And so when I'm trying to maximize fruit size on varieties, basically every variety besides Honeycrisp gets watered a certain way. And then when I'm controlling fruit size on Honeycrisp, it kind of almost gets watered the opposite of those varieties. And the old way was just 12 hours. Everything gets 12 hours.
Yeah, similar here. I would say I've cut down irrigation durations quite a bit. A lot fewer 12-hour sets. I'm able to see that the water is driving down sufficiently deep into the root profile, even with like an 8-hour set, or depending on the soil type, maybe 6 hours. And so I don't need a 12-hour irrigation set, and I might run that every other day instead of every 4 days, or maybe every day when it's really hot.
Yeah.
And then it also unlocks certain capacities, like if you wanted to pulse irrigate like an hour on, an hour off, an hour on, an hour off for 4 hours. Trying to do that manually is just so wrought with potential error. If he's over irrigating each pulse by like half an hour, then you've ended up, and you do it 4 times, then you put 2 more hours on than you wanted, right? So now you've irrigated 6 hours instead of 4 hours. And that's easy to do when you're doing stuff like that. So not to mention it's just super time consuming. This guy's just opening a valve, waiting an hour, shutting it off, and he doesn't have time to do anything else.
And then that's almost impossible if you don't have a VFD,
right?
Too, it's like, because that VFD is going to regulate your pressure, and it's. But now with this technology, you have the ability to do that.